because you have a parent, like your mom or your dad, in jail does not mean that they're a bad person.
My dad is silly. He is kind of a little close to getting out of jail.
When my father's in jail, I feel sad. Also, I feel kind of lonely.
When I visit, it's a shame because we would be able to spend more time together and I won't have to be in a waiting room. It's horrible.
I go to jail to see my daddy, and I always wanted to see him like every day, like after I get out of school and on the weekends.
Well, my dad he's a nice person. I love my dad a lot.
He used to be in the jail that was next to my grandma's church, back of it, but then he transferred.
I feel like pretty furious, and I feel upset.
I don't like it, like people just point the finger and like, oh, that's the daughter of so and so, and it bothers me.
I would like to change that we can't like touch them over the table.
I worry about if someone punches him and he has a bruise on his eye.
They're serving their consequence, and we all have to do that at one point.
Even though that he might be in jail now, it's not like because he's like a really, really bad person, because he's not. It's horrible.
It bothers me.
How do you call a contact visit and you only get to touch your father one time, and then when we sit down, you don't get to touch him at all?
And I feel upset, and I feel furious.
I think that if the judges and like all the political people cared, then it would make a difference. And if they thought about if the person had kids or not, it would make a difference.
My wish would be that can my father get out of jail?
It would be great if my father got out of jail.
When I leave the jail, I say bye-bye, and I say I miss you. And I say I miss you. And I say I miss you.
Some powerful voices. One of the things that we do on my radio station WNPR is we try very hard not to talk about a population without talking with them. And we weren't able to have any of those children on stage with us, but I think hearing their voices, it's very powerful. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Dankowski. I'm the Vance Chair in Journalism at CCSU, and I'm the News Director of WNPR, and I host a talk show called Where We Live. And we've taken on this topic of children with incarcerated parents in the past, and we've had some enlightening conversations about it, and it's an important topic. And so with our panelists for the next little bit, we're going to be talking about this issue. In advance of yet another excellent film on this topic called Troop 1500, Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, which you'll see in just a moment. The first panelist I wanted to introduce is Aileen Keyes, who's a research and policy specialist with the Institute for Municipal and Policy Research and works on this subject. Aileen, thank you for being here and for setting all this up. When we hear numbers like 1.5 or 1.7 million children with incarcerated parents, give us a sense of just how big an issue this is in Connecticut and in America.
Thank you, John. Thank you for being here. There's a couple things. It is a big problem. However, how big of a problem it is actually unknown. It's very difficult to get reliable data on the number of children who are affected by parental incarceration, and that's something that keeps coming up again and again as a recommendation, is that we don't really know the scope of the problem that we're trying to address, and how can we find out how big of an issue it really is. Then some ethical issues come up about, well, once we start identifying them and collecting the information and the numbers, who's going to have access to that, who keeps that information, and how will it be used? And then also just some issues relating to how you would get reliable data. Department of Corrections does collect information upon intake of a new inmate of how many dependents that they have. However, this is self-report data, which is vulnerable to inaccuracies. In addition, there are some pretty strong motivators to not tell the truth in that situation, one of which certainly being child support enforcement. Once you acknowledge that you have a dependent or several dependents, then the balance of how much you owe for child support begins to accrue, even while you're serving time in a state facility. So there are certain reasons, and also not having the state involved with your children. You may want to keep that, that's your family, that's private, that's personal. You don't want them to know, you don't want DCF involved. I mean, there's a lot of security around the secrecy. So we don't have necessarily the most reliable information. There are some estimates, and I'll just briefly, Connecticut has the highest rate of incarceration in the Northeast. And as a side note, one of the highest levels of racial disparity in the entire country, which I think we may be surprised at, I'm not sure. And it was estimated in 2006 that Hartford alone, about 1 in 6 children have at least one parent incarcerated. So those are some estimates that we are able to find, although again, the reliability and validity is always in question.
Of course, one of the things that people would wonder about is, does it mean that if you have a parent who's been incarcerated that you necessarily will end up at some point in jail yourself? What do we know about that?
That's another issue that's frequently discussed and in debate. There's an estimate that 7 out of 10 children who have a parent incarcerated will at some time end up incarcerated themselves. So some people still talk about this and they put it on the front of their webpage, and then other agencies and advocates and researchers strongly oppose that. They critique the studies that came up with the numbers. They say that they were not the most valid studies, and they also criticize what this is doing to the children. When children see people saying and service providers saying 7 out of 10 children are likely to end up incarcerated themselves, what is that telling them? That's not giving them any hope. It is such a negative message. And it sends a message to teachers and service providers, almost that these children are throwaways. They're going to end up in jail anyway. Yes, they're acting out. They're going to end up in jail anyway. Don't bother. So there is some discrepancy over that, but that number is widely published.
In just a minute, I want to get to some of the programs that you're working on here at CCSU, but I want to turn to Radia Hassan, a caseworker who's worked with offenders and their families. Radia, welcome. I'm wondering if you can sort of talk about some of the effects on children that you've noticed in dealing with kids whose parents are behind bars.
Okay, there's various effects that children face. A lot of it is low, poor academic performance, depression, low self-esteem. A lot of times what can tend to happen is that intergenerational cycle of incarceration. A lot of times that establishment of the attachment with loved ones, either incarcerated or just building healthy relationships in general.
So they face all these different challenges. Is the state meeting some of these needs? Are programs like these that we've been talking about meeting some of these needs? Who's helping these kids?
Yes, the state, as well as with CCSU and IMRP, are actually our funders for programs that we provide within the community. I'm a program director of the Tomorrow's Children's Program, and that is a program for children of incarcerated parents. What we do is we provide counseling and case management for children who have an incarcerated parent for 13 months. Within these systems, we provide theatrical arts, which actually helps clients heal, a different form of healing through basic counseling. But our goal and intention is to reduce the rate of that possibility of incarceration, as well as help those children cope with the separation and loss of their loved ones.
How do you begin to break this cycle that we talk about? If it's 7 in 10 kids end up in some way or other the same situation that parents are in, when they go back to a situation where there's poverty, where there's maybe a lack of opportunity, what steps in to break this cycle? It's one thing to help the kids short term, but what's the thing to break the cycle?
I think a lot of it is just the positive hope and giving these children a sense of hope when they have the hopelessness. Like you said, many of our children are in urban communities. We provide the service in New Haven and as well as in Hartford. And so when we're looking at the conditions, we're looking at the low performances in school, we're looking at the inadequate resources that they have within their own family systems. Our ultimate goal is to provide that additional support for not only the child but the caregiver as well. in addition to the incarcerated parent. So we think that a lot of times when we try to reestablish or connect family members, that also gives them that possibility of hope. And when they do become adults, that they can actually establish a better sense of relationships with their children.
Reestablishing relationships, why is that important? I mean, I think a lot of people, clearly, we would want to think that parents should be near their children, but a lot of people are behind bars because they're probably, in some ways, not the best parents. Does it always make sense to reconnect children with their parents?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, there's cases where there's been abuse and neglect, so we would never want to reconnect that. And we also respect the fact that maybe that child is just resentful and not wanting to connect with their parents. But our ultimate goal is to provide the service for that child, to give that child a sense of belonging, give that child a sense of another opportunity at life. You know, as we looked at in the film tonight, you know, in many cases, moms may or dads may do something that is a heinous crime. However, how does that impact their relationship with their child? You know, the reasons behind it are many systemic reasons that occur in our society. A lot of it is poverty. A lot of that is, again, the poor attachments that they had when they were growing up. So again, we're not forcing that issue of reconnecting with their parent who is incarcerated. But if there is a possibility, we believe that it would, because we believe that strengthening bonds of the family can also strengthen individuals.
Aileen, what surprises have you seen since you started doing this research?
That's a good question. The surprises I have seen, I think that some of the children don't know their parent is incarcerated. That was something that surprised me. And it's done at times, or usually, as a form of protection for the child. A lot of times the caregiver will tell the child that, you know, mom or dad is not in jail, they're in college, they're at school, they're studying, or they're in the military and they're overseas. Part of it is to protect the image of the parent who's incarcerated, to maintain that image of respect and trust, and you don't want to give them a negative impression. Another is to protect the child from knowing that where their parent is and maybe being afraid for their parent, what they're going through, and then not have to come visit. And some parents who are incarcerated said that they never wanted their children to come visit them there. They didn't want them to see them in that environment, in that situation. And so they wouldn't want their children to know that that's where they are. So I think that's definitely something that was surprising.
Maybe you could pass the microphone down to Giselle Jacobs, who's worked with Communities Inspiring Action. She has personal stories of living with incarcerated parents. Giselle, welcome. I'm glad you're able to make it through the traffic, too.
Thank you.
It's always difficult. Tell us about the impetus for you to get involved in this as a community activist.
Well, I was inspired to want to be involved with Communities Inspiring Action, Youth of Incarcerated Parents. I was introduced to it by a fellow resident. They informed me of some dialogues that were going to be taking place, at the Y, which is right around the corner from where I live at. And I attended, the dialogues. And, the reason why it was of importance to me, of course, is because I was a product of parents who, had been incarcerated while growing up as a child. Both of my parents, as a matter of fact. And I also am a mother to 4 children. My oldest son is currently incarcerated, so I have the privilege of bringing his 7-year-old daughter up to visit him, at the prison. As well as I have 3 granddaughters, and of course my oldest granddaughter, who's 7, that's my son's daughter, and then I also, my other 2 youngest granddaughters, who is, one is 1 and the other is 3, and their dad began serving a sentence, over the summer. So this is like, not to mention, my community is like affected by it, and I just
It's all around you.
It's all around me. Yeah.
It's totally all around you.
Yeah. So.
Does it feel normal in that way?
As a child, it felt normal.
Why? Tell me.
because of the environment that I grew up in, it seemed as if all of my friends, were experiencing it, in some form or fashion, whether it was a parent or a sibling, you know. So yeah, as a child, it felt normal. It wasn't until I got older and actually went into the military and was able to travel and, meet different people, was I able to see that that wasn't as normal as thing as what I thought it was. That's not something that people do.
So these things that we've heard about how this affects children, did you feel some of these things yourself? I mean, did you feel isolated, a little confused? How did you feel growing up, having parents behind bars?
Well, my dad spent more time behind bars than my mom, but even still, when she was away and I had to spend time with my grandmother, it was, it was uncomfortable, because for one, my mom wasn't as strict as my grandmother, and I believe, the rules were different, and I kind of felt like, even though I believed that my grandmother loved me, I didn't feel the love as I did with my mom. And even though, my mom had the struggles that she had, at no time did I ever feel as though my mother didn't love me, So, did I answer your question?
I think you did. No, I definitely think you did. So now you have to bring a 7-year-old granddaughter to visit someone behind bars, to visit your son behind bars. What's that like for you?
Well, the last visit we went to wasn't pretty, didn't go too well, because at that particular time they were in the middle of changing their rules to where you needed 2 IDs instead of 1 ID. So it was very sad to have to tell my granddaughter that she was not going to be able to see her dad on that evening because we didn't have a separate form of ID. But other than that, the visit prior to that, they now have put a bookcase inside of the visiting room. So, she was able to go across and get a book. I had to escort her, and we went and got a book of Cinderella. And, when we came back to the visiting table, I was about to start reading. She's like, no, I want my dad to read, So her dad was able to read to her. And, it was great. We didn't get through the whole book. We're going to finish it hopefully at the next visit.
So, do you know about services that are available? I mean, have you had to learn over time about what's available to people in a situation like you were growing up, or your granddaughter right now, to help as they deal with the fact that someone's behind bars?
No, and it's great to know. Today I know that there are some services available for children who have parents incarcerated, although when I was growing up, it was non-existent to my understanding, as far as I know. And up until I began, getting involved with Communities Inspiring Action, I had no idea that there was actually services available to children who are experiencing that. So because I, am involved in other community, activities and so on and so forth, I do my best to try to, let the families know that, families in crisis does exist, because a lot of times they don't know. I just spoke with the family, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago. Her 15-year-old son, dad, got locked up, and she didn't want to be the one to have to bring him to visit his dad. So I was able to let her know that there's there's an agency that may be able to help them.
I asked Radia this before, but how do you think we break a cycle that, as you said, it's just all around your community, it's all around you, all throughout, people who are going behind bars, and you've been related to people who are going behind bars. What's the thing to do to break a cycle so it doesn't keep happening over and over again?
Well, I don't think I'll have the answer, but I mean, for me, I would think it would be very important to start working with the child early on, and not, be honest with the children as well. A lot was hidden from me when I was coming up, and I think that kept me naive, and I know it probably was done to protect me, as I heard, someone share earlier, but I think, just being honest with children, because children, they know a lot more than we think they do, at least nowadays, and also exposing them to other, because even though I grew up, in the projects, in Beverly Square, to have been able to be exposed to other, environments, growing up, to see that that wasn't it, that, would have been helpful as well.
Do you agree with that, Radia?
Oh, definitely so. I definitely agree with that. I think, sort of going back to what Gazelle said, is that a lot of it, when it's in the community, a lot of times it's normalized, but there's also a stigma and shame. So in the case of Families in Crisis, the agency's been around for 30 years. However, how many people are going to, come forward and say, I really need services. A lot of times people are afraid of that because of the stigma and shame that's attached to saying that they have an incarcerated loved one. And especially for the children. I mean, one of the things, as a former school teacher, the challenges that I faced with one of my students was that she wanted to fit in so bad with the classmates that she would actually create a situation that occurred with her and her father. And so it was the shame and stigma attached to saying that my dad's incarcerated. It's like how it was back in the 60s when one woman and a man got divorced. There was a shame and stigma attached to it. So one of the things we're trying to eradicate is that stigma and shame, and build upon relationships, because statistically it shows that when men and women are married, their children have a lesser rate of incarcerations, or the history of incarcerations actually occurring, versus those who are not. Some of the challenges we face also would be with the identification of the parents, in terms of there's a dad maybe with multiple children. How do we reach out to find all 3 or 4 children when he may not have a positive relationship with the co-parents? So we're trying to work on all kinds of various techniques and strategies to identify them, but also in identifying them, help rid that cycle.
I just wanted to add one thing also. Certainly services are key, I think, to this, but also the majority of the people who are coming into our prison facilities are from certain neighborhoods and communities. And I think if we tried to shift some of our funding from corrections into the communities that are the primary feeders for our criminal justice system, then hopefully we can ease some of the environmental factors that contribute to crime and therefore contribute to incarceration. We can ease some of those factors and reduce incarceration overall, which will, of course, certainly help with the cyclical effect.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with what has happened here. We have children of incarcerated parents. Incarceration is the issue.
Right.
We have a lot of people, as you started with, incarcerated in Connecticut.
And there's a big issue of over-incarceration and lengthy sentences that may or may not be necessary. So I think it's a kind of a reevaluation into our criminal justice system and how it's currently occurring, and if that's really the best system that we could have.
In a cycle that we noticed certainly in some of these neighborhoods, where when people come out of prison, they're going back into a specific neighborhood, perhaps where they got in trouble in the first place, and perhaps where they don't have a job or any opportunity to do anything other than go back into jail.
I think reentry services are certainly important, and I know I'm kind of getting a little bit away from the children. However, if you're helping their parent, then you're helping the children in their home life. But certainly, there aren't enough services in the facilities for the people when they are serving their time, and we have them then. We have them. If you use some of the money that you're spending on corrections to assist them to identify why they engaged in some criminal activity, identify those issues, try and remedy them, and then prepare them for reentry, give them some tools, some strength, then hopefully they can reenter more successfully. Because as it is now, they're not receiving services to deal with whatever issues they were dealing with prior to being arrested. They're not dealing with those. Then they're not dealing with the issue of being arrested, becoming incarcerated, whatever happens throughout incarceration and the reentry process. And these are all moments of potential trauma. So then you leave somebody out in the community who now has a record and is going to have a really difficult time getting a job and reestablishing themselves. It's so easy for them to fall back to what they knew, which is the behavior that they were engaging in prior to their arrest. And so we're really setting them up for failure in a sense, which is setting up their children for failure.
I want to bring into the conversation Josh Therio. He's a student and a filmmaker, and some of your films are going to be featured in just a little bit. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe you can tell us how you got involved in all this.
Well, I just kind of got thrown into it, to be honest with you. As you know, I'm a junior here. I grew up in a setting where both of my parents were together, and I was raised that way. And to come to school and start pursuing film, I met Andrew Clark and Eileen, and they offered me a job opportunity to work on films upon the issue. And I've never dealt with that issue before. So it was really like going into something very blind. I didn't know much about it. And yeah, that's pretty much how I got started.
So tell us about the people that you met and the stories that you told.
Oh, geez. It's been a long road, but it's been a very interesting one. I've met numerous amounts of people with all kinds of different stories, and each one is different, and they all are very impactful to me. And through these stories, I form relationships with the people that I've met, and I continue to have these relationships. One individual who stands out is a young girl, Kayla Johnson, and she is currently 17. She's a mother of a almost 1-year-old child now, and her father has been in prison her entire life, and her story is quite remarkable.
What's your story?
Let's see. She was 15, got arrested herself for assault, which I believe her father is in jail for. And she got out of prison, or juvenile hall, excuse me, and she got pregnant. And at the time of her pregnancy, she was involved with her baby's father, and he got arrested, and he is currently in prison. And she came to the realization, I'm bringing a child into this world. I cannot mess that up. I gotta make some changes. And that's when, I believe it was that pivotal time when I met her. And I met her, her child, Kayvon, was probably 6 months old. And we began to work together within production and community in the communications department. What that is we bring in members of nonprofit organizations to teach them how to use film and tell stories, and by the end of the 8 weeks or whatever, they create a film. And it was a lot more than just that. She would come in and we would talk, and she would just open up about everything that she has been through, and she got really engaged in what we were doing.
Rudy, I'm wondering if you might comment a little bit on how that story that he just told is similar maybe to some of the people that you've worked with.
Very similar. A lot of times we, working with children, I can think of a particular client in mind where this pattern or a generational pattern begins to creep into the lives of the children. There's a dad who's at the age of 17, unfortunately he murdered someone, and then his child at the age of 13 began to start doing certain things, rebelling, getting involved in the criminal justice system, and not with an intent, but just the cycle itself, the longing to want to be with his father, but lacked the ideas of how do I communicate my feelings. So a lot of that issues, I guess, with the client that Josh just mentioned, that's that anger inside, those mixed feelings. You're talking about an adolescence on top of having a parent incarcerated.
Well, when we've talked about this before, and it's so interesting because so much of the stuff that you hear, I mean, kids get angry with their parents anyway. They rebel against their parents anyway. These are all the same things that happened when I was 15. It's just that I was in a different situation. So you layer these things on. How do you teach people to deal with these issues?
Well, one of the ways is, developing those coping skills. I think that goes back to the parent who's incarcerated. We go in and provide that same service for them, so that when going back to the adolescent or the child, when the child has any ability to, which most children don't, know how to cope with just basic life circumstances, we work with that child, teaching them communication styles, communication skills, being assertive versus being passive and burying their feelings or being aggressive, and acting out. A lot of their behavioral issues are, surfacing in the schools. With the work that Families in Crisis has provided for these individuals, there have been remarkable changes in the progress of the children's behavioral issues. I mean, we attend PPTs, we're very supportive educationally, in terms of helping the families. A lot of times they don't even know what to advocate for. In a classroom, the teachers are dealing with so many issues, academically, socially, so they're not able to identify that maybe Johnny has a parent who's incarcerated. So they're looking at the behavioral issues and thinking that is something else, whereas it's just this child has never learned how to communicate his feelings. So that's why we try our best to connect the child and the parent. That's so important, that whole attachment piece. They want a sense of belonging. I mean, children love unconditionally. They don't think about, okay, my dad did X or my mom did Y. They just think about the fact that I have two parents, my mom and my dad. So we work diligent in that to assist it. But we definitely have many clients like the client that Josh referred to. But we also have success stories where we've seen children turn their lives around. And when the 13 months are over, we're looking at families, and the families are like, okay, where do we go now? We're at a good place, and we want them to maintain that. So we have a preservation theory as well.
Well, I want to get to some questions, and if anybody has questions, we have a microphone down below, and there's also biographies of all the panelists here. If you want to learn more about them, you can come on down if you want to ask a question. You mentioned success stories. Give us a success story.
Oh, I have a great one. There was a younger child in elementary school, and really faced a lot of challenges with being connected with his dad. Dad wanted to be connected with him, but unfortunately had an unhealthy relationship with the co-parent. So how does that play a role in this child's life when here he's a young male, lacking positive male models in his life? Many of them were incarcerated, and so now he wants to build this relationship. So he had, challenges in school, behavioral. He had been put out of at least 4 schools, and believe it or not, he was 7. Okay, but eventually he got to go to the school that he requested, and it was his dad's relatives. So his paternal relatives attended that school, and he wanted to be attached to his father. So here, his mom finally gave in, and she let him go to that school. He made Student of the Month, and that was just such a highlight for all of us, the caseworkers, the family members, the school itself, because it took a team, and it takes a village to raise a child, really, it does. But it was just remarkable, and I happened to see him in the performance through the Judy Dwarren Performance Project, which is one of our collaborative agencies that provides services for children of incarcerated parents. Unbelievable, his performance, very outgoing, whereas initially when we provided services, very withdrawn, didn't know how to communicate, but he was the star of the show. So it was definitely one of our success stories.
Could you talk a little bit more, Aileen, about some of the Judy Dwarren projects? I mean, I understand that that's something that you folks have been involved with. We've been involved with them a little bit as well. We've presented some of their things on the air.
Right. It's a good organization. It's out of Trinity College. They use arts. They use the arts, written. They use dance, poetry, spoken word, movement, song, as a means of expressing feelings and a way of communicating what's going on. And so it's kind of providing a voice through the arts for children who otherwise may not feel they have a voice. And it helps them to realize what is currently going on with them. It kind of identifies it, allows them to bring it out and express it in a way that may be more comfortable for them. It kind of gives them a tool to recognize what's going on, rehabilitate. Judy Dwarren has been working at the York Correctional Facility for several years, going in there and working with the women who are currently incarcerated on using these artistic means of expressing their experiences, and she's developed some very, very meaningful productions. And then she decided to try and focus on the children. So one year we worked with them on working with the children in the community and their mothers in York, and then bringing them together for a final showing and an extended visit. And it was very meaningful and very moving, and the children performed kind of for the moms performed for the children, and then they got to enjoy a day visit where they took photos together. They worked on creating a picture frame together, so they worked on an art project. And then just this past year, we just completed the first year of a 3-year program during which the Judy Dorn's teaching artists are working with the children in the community for a more lengthy period of time. And there's 3 phases to it. So the first phase and the second phase, they're primarily working with the children. In the third phase, they actually bring the children to York Correctional and have a 2-night, 3-day kind of camp visit with their mothers. I attended the camp and spent all day Saturday at York Correctional with their mothers and engaged in this very long, wonderful visit where they used song and drawings and paint and movement as a means of kind of expressing their feelings and what's going on. And then we stayed overnight, the children and the caregivers and myself and some other volunteers and workers from Families in Crisis stayed overnight at a nearby camp, and then went back the next day on Sunday and engaged in another extended visit. And it was very meaningful. It was very good. It's the first year of a 3-year project that Judy is doing through the funding from the Hartford Public Foundation. So.